Hi everyone! In today's video, I'm going to bring you a team building guide in Seiya Legend of Justice. Now, obviously, team building is a quite chunky topic. There's loads of different aspects to it. So rather than trying to cover everything in one go, I'm going to break it down into different components. And in this video, I'm going to talk specifically about positioning. So how to position your knights in a way so that it's quite a well-balanced team, and also so that it helps you to bring out certain team synergy, etc. Now, before actually moving on to the various different things that you have to look out for when building a team, I just want to do a bit of a refresher up front in terms of the actual basic concept of various different attacks in a team. So on the screen, you have two pictures, left and right, which are basically two teams. Let's start off with the left hand side one first. This is trying to focus on normal attacks. Now, take first of all, remember all of those numbers on the screen. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the usual numbering I'm gonna give to all of the team positions. So I'll be referring to that quite a lot in my video, both today and also in the future about other team building guides, etc. So just remember that number 1, 2 will be up front, number 3, 4, and 5 will be at the back. Now, on the left hand side, you have what is the normal attacks in a battle. So what you can see here is your knights in position 1, 3, and 4 will attack into opponent's number 1. Your knights in position 2 and 5 will attack into the opponent's number 2. So this is quite straightforward. What this basically means is that, first of all, normal attack would never hit the enemy's back row, right? So your tanks up front, the reason why they need to be tanked is because they will be taking off the normal attack. And normal attacks roughly constitute about, I would want to say about 50% of all the damage dealt. I kind of gave this number because if you actually compare to normal attack versus skill attack, normal attacks, you normally do a normal attack every 1/2 or maybe 2 seconds, whereas skilled attack they're normally on a cooldown of about 6 or 7 seconds. So your normal attack hits 3 times more frequent than your skilled attack. And if you look at the actual damage, normally a skill attack do something which is take doing damage around 300% of attack or 250, 400% of attack. So around the same ratio of 1 to 3 as well. So if you do all of the maths behind there, I think normal attack normally constitute about half of all the damage dealt. So if you're saying all of the normal attack is going to go to your two front row tanks, they will be literally absorbing 50% of all of the enemy's damage. And that's why it's super important for you to have someone quite bulky up front to tank all of those damage. All right, so this is basically what happens for normal attack. The main thing to remember in your head is that the knights in position 1 are going to take hit from 3 normal attack, whereas the knight in position 2 are going to take damage from, or take normal attack from 2 opponents. So bear that in mind because I'll be moving on later about why that's important and how that could be affecting your positioning. All right, now let's move on to the right hand side. The right hand side is more trying to demonstrate skilled attacks. Um, Now, skill attacks are quite different in terms of who they target. Some of them will say in their description they target a single enemy opposite. Some of them might be targeting all of the enemies, or some of them might be saying, target some random enemies. All of those are kind of fixed. So you can't really do much about that. Like if it's just targeting the one directly opposite, then you can't really it's just going to target that. If you're targeting everyone, then just hit everyone. If it's random, then you can control that. So I'm not going to go too much in terms of those skills. However, there are certain skills which basically say they will be targeting 3 enemies up front, right? If they say target 3 enemies up front, this is now what the chart on the right hand side is trying to demonstrate, is that which 3 enemies are they targeting. If is you in your position 1 and you release a skill which targets 3 enemies up front, you'll be targeting the enemies of position 1, 3, and 4. If it's your position 3, it will be targeting the enemies 1, 3, and 4 again. And if it's your position 4, it's also going to be targeting the position 1, 3, and 4 opposite. Whereas if it's your target, sorry, If it's your knight in position 2, then that's gonna target the enemy 245, and if it's in your position 5, it's gonna target the enemy's 245. And immediately you can already see some kind of pattern, right? So very similar to normal attack. If you are on kind of the right hand side, it'll be targeting enemies on the right hand side. If you're on the left hand side, it'll be targeting the enemies on the left hand side. The only exception is the one in the middle, which is kind of being grouped into the right hand side for this kind of matter. So this is basically the simple concept. And what you need to take note of here is actually if you look at the intersection of all of those skill attacks, what you will notice is that number four, position number four, is the person who's going to take the most number of normal attacks. Sorry, the most number of skilled attacks. This is because he will be taking it from 1, 3, and 4, and 5. So he is essentially going to be in the range. Sorry. He's going to be in the range for all five of them, actually. I just read. Yeah, so the enemy position number 4 at the back, so the one in the middle, is going to be in the target of all five of skill attacks, assuming they target 3 enemies up front, that is, right? Um, Whereas, if you do look in comparison, the enemy's position 5, let's say, he is only going to take skilled damage from 2 of your knights, whereas the enemy's position 3 is going to take out of 3 of your knights. So basically, this is going to kind of make you think already in the head that if I have to play someone if I need to position my 3 knights at the back, who should be the one I place in the middle? And that should be normally the one who's able to take the most number hit because he will be getting hit the most, right? So it's also as simple as this. Okay, now that you know how positioning affects attack, let's move on to the actual team building itself. I'm going to start off with the front row. So if you remember, I already mentioned your front row knights are going to be ones taking off the normal attack, and therefore they need to essentially tank up front. The one in position 1 are going to take normal attack from 3 enemies, whereas the one in position 2 would take normal attack only from 2 enemies. So if you do have a choice of between 2 different tanks, for example, you normally want to place the bulkier one on the left hand side, so in position 1. So in this case, Agati is clearly the bulkier of the two in comparison to Moses, because Agati doesn't die when he takes fatal damage for the first time, etc. So as a result, I want to place Agati on the left hand side in position 1, so he can tank from 3 normal attacks. So that's quite straightforward. However, a more advanced technique of who to place up front will be try to involve knights who actually have trigger effects when they're getting hit. So there are lots of examples of knights who are able to do that. Aphrodite is a good example. Taurus Aldebaran is a good example. Argo is a good example. Gemini Cannon and also Athena to some extent. They're all good examples. And there are possibly more, but I'll just talk about this ones because those are other ones off the top of my head. But for example, Aphrodite with Max Constellation, he's going to poison enemies who are going to attack into him. For Argo, he has a chance of petrify. For Aldebaran, he has a chance of doing kind of both reflect damage, but also kind of knockdown. So that's a control effect. Gemini Cannon, for the first time, an enemy attacking to him with Max Constellation up, he's gonna confuse that enemy. Athena is a bit of a different one, but basically Athena when she's getting hit, sorry, if it's a critical hit, then she's gonna trigger a shield. And obviously, the more she takes a hit, the more likely it's going to be one of them is going to be a critical hit, etc. So all of them, to some extent, actually benefit from getting hit. So therefore, as a result, you potentially want to place them up front. Even some of the more fragile knights, for example, Aphrodite or Gemini Cannon, they are not tanks. However, you can still place them up front because of this effect. I'll talk later on about how to actually pair them up with other characters so that you can actually protect them a bit better. But as a general rule of thumb, because they have a trigger effect that only activate when they're getting hit, it's normally a good idea to place them up front so that you can activate that skill as early as possible. This is because if you are someone at the back, you won't hit by any normal attack, so you will only be targeted by skill attack. And skill attacks normally don't activate till at least kind of 5 or 6 seconds into the battle, whereas normal attacks will be activated from the very first second. So if I have my Aphrodite up front, I can poison the enemy straight away in the first second. If I have him at the back, I won't be able to poison anyone until at least 5 or 6 seconds in. So that is going to lose you some kind of pace in terms of the battle. So that's why you potentially want to place them up front. Now, if you do need to place someone at the back, remember the one in middle position, so position 4, represented by where Athena is right now, that position is going to be in the range of, on average, the most number of skill attack. Because if the enemy skill attack targets 3 enemies up front, right, then every single target is going to hit that middle position at the back, that position 4. So she could potentially be in the range of 5 enemies skill attack. And therefore, if you do want to place someone at the back who also benefit from getting hit, then normally you want to place them in the middle. So this is normally how you want to do off the defensive positioning. You normally want to place them in the 2 front position and also the middle back position in terms of your more defensive knight. Now let's move on to the more offensive knights. For the more offensive knights, normally you want to place him in the position where I have my Secretary Seiya in right now. This is because this is on average going to be the position which you take the least number of skilled hits. First of all, he is protected from all of the normal attack, and also in terms of skill hit, assuming the enemy is only hitting 3 enemies in front, etc., he is only going to be in range of the enemy's position 2 and 5. So this one, on average, takes the least number of hits, and therefore this is where you place your primary DPS or the most fragile person. In your secondary DPS position, which I'm going to represent by my Aris Moon, I'm going to place him here. So this can either be a support or secondary DPS. He would take a bit more damage than where Sagittarius Seiya is because he can potentially be in the range of 3 skilled attack. However, because he still doesn't take any normal attack and he take way less skill attack than the one in the middle, this is normally you want to place your secondary DPS with the second most fragile person on your team. So this is normally how you want to position your more offensive units. All right, now the next thing I want to talk about is kind of more the team synergy side. So I'm going to bring Aphrodite back as an example. Now, Aphrodite, as I did mention, right, you potentially want to place him up front. And even better if you can place him on the front left position so that he is able to poison 3 enemies who attack into him. Now, the problem with this is obviously Aphrodite is actually really fragile, right? So how can I actually make sure that I can actually make sure my Aphrodite survives long enough to even for the poison to work? A classic way of how people do is take advantage of other people's opening skills or other skills. For example, Moses have this ability to protect your whole team for the first 8 seconds and reduce damage by 40%. So that's the classic way of how you do it. But that got nothing to do with position, right? This is activated for every single knight on your team. So even though this is normally the best way of doing it, this is not what I want to talk about today, because today I'm focusing exclusively on positioning. So now let's actually think about positioning. Um, Aphrodite on the top left hand side, who is going to attack into him? The knights who are going to attack into him are going to be the enemy's position 1, 3, and 4. So if you want your Aphrodite to stay longer in the battle, what do you want to do? You want to reduce the enemy's damage output from oppositions 1, 3, and 4. So how can you do that? Normally, the best way of doing that is either if you have some kind of damage reduction skills, some kind of control debuff skills. So I'm gonna use here Aquarius Chemist as an example. If I have my Aquarius Chemist right behind Aphrodite, Aquarius Chemist ultimate is able to freeze 3 enemies up front. And that who is gonna be Aquarius Chemist target for his ultimate? It's gonna be the enemy's position 1, 3, 4, and therefore the 3 enemies who are attacking into Aphrodite. So this is what I would normally want to say as a good synergy, because you basically are using your back row knights to control the people who will be attacking to one of your most fragile up front, and therefore helping him to survive. And this is why really this is really good synergy. If I have my Crest Chemist on this side, however, this is not going to help much because yes, he may still be able to freeze the position enemy position 4, but he will be freezing 2, 4, 5, and only number 4 would potentially attack into Aphrodite. So this is not a very good way protecting Aphrodite through positioning. And that's why when you actually think about kind of the very different positions in your team, have a think about kind of the skill range of every single one of them and whether they will complement each other or not. The best thing you want to do is normally you want to control the enemies who would be able to deal the most amount of damage to you, and vice versa, etc. So, for example, do most amount of damage to the one that you think is the most problematic, and you focus all of your attacks onto them. So this is normally how you want to consider in terms of your position. The other thing I want to focus on would be in terms of control. Let me take another example of this time using Argo. This is really good positioning right now because what happens is, I already mentioned, Argo have the ability of potentially petrifying enemies who attacks into him. Now, all of the enemy position 1, 3, and 4 are gonna do their normal attack to Argo, right? If you remember from the chart I showed earlier. So that basically means Argo has a passive ability to control any of the enemy 1, 3, and 4. And what does Aquarius Camus does? Aquarius Camus with his ultimate is able to control the enemy's opposition 2, 4, and 5. So by having a Crest Camus and also my Argo in the position as I have right now on the screen, you are effectively have the ability to control every single knight in the opposition, and that's why this is a good positioning. This, however, is a bad positioning because what happens is that you are controlling everyone on the left hand side, but you're not leaving anyone on the right hand side to kind of delay their attacks. So even though you have loads of control on the left hand side, it's very likely some of the controls will overlap. For example, you free someone who's already petrified, or vice versa, and then therefore the effect is not actually to the fullest. So this is not normally a good way of doing it. If you do have two control knights, try to separate them in a certain way so that all of their targets wouldn't overlap. So this is normally what you want to do in terms of controls. The other thing is that if you do end up having control effects, who would be targeting the same opponents, try to do some kind of time difference, in order to spread them out, so at least they don't overlap as much. So a classic example would be, let's say I have Gemini Cannon again, right? I did mention before Gemini Cannon have the ability of confusing everyone the very first time they hit him. So if I have both Christ Canvas and also Gemini Cannon, now because normally what happens is if I have Gemini Cannon, I want to place him up front so that he will be able to confuse the enemy as early as possible. However, what you have here right now on the screen is an overlap of the control effect. Because what happens now is that my Gemini Cannon is gonna confuse the opposite teams 1, 3, and 4 straight away. Because normal attack actually hits faster than any skills, if you remember that. Normal attack hits faster than skills. So what that basically means is your Gemini Cannon is gonna get hit by normal attack before a Christ Canvas opening skill. And what you're going to have is now Gemini Cannon is going to confuse enemies 1, 3, and 4, but then Christ Canvas is going to freeze everyone straight afterward. And this is a really bad example of positioning because essentially your control effects have now overlap. If the enemy is already frozen, then their confusion is essentially useless, right? So you definitely want to avoid situation like that. So if you do have a Christ Canvas and also Gemini Cannon, how can you potentially position yourself in a way so that they don't overlap? It's very simple. You move Gemini Cannon to the back, right? You want to move them to the middle back position because he will still be in the range of the most number of skill attack. However, because he won't be hit by normal attack at the start of the battle, he won't trigger his confusion straight away. So therefore, now what's going to happen is that a Christ Camus is going to freeze everyone for the very first 4 seconds. After the 4 seconds is gone, the enemy may do their kind of, I don't know, skill attack, etc. And now Gemini Cannon is going to be in the range for the skill attack, and now then he will be confusing it. So therefore, you have spread out the time interval of your two control effects so that they are now, even though they are affecting everyone, they are now affecting them at different time frame, and now therefore you're actually maximizing the amount of control you're able to inflict on your opponent. So this is a good example of positioning. The other way how you can do positioning to kind of spread out your control effect is that if they are affected by your ultimate, then you can potentially change the position to determine which ultimate get hit the first. So the classic example I'm going to use here is going to be Libradoko and also Arismu. All right. So why do I use this example? Let me do it this way first. Okay. Actually, no. Let me do it this way first. So, Libradoko's ultimate attack hits everyone in the back row and knocks them up. That's an interruption, and therefore there's a control effect. Iris Moose ultimate also hits everyone's back line and blind them, therefore making their immunity immune to make you a nice immune to their damage, and therefore also a type of control effect. They both hit the back row, so this is where I'm saying that you potentially want to spread out your timing, right? Because you don't want those control effects to overlap. Now, in the game, because the person in position one, so represented by where Librodoko is, he's going to be hit by the most number of normal attack. So, most likely, this will be the position who is going to release ultimate first, then followed by the other tank position. Whereas, I look at the ones at the back, normally the enemies, your knight in position four, so in the middle position, get hit by the most skill attack, he's the most likely to launch an ultimate out of all of the ones at the back. So with that in your head, what you can then do is saying that, okay, if I have my Liberdoko in position one, uh, then he is likely going to release his ultimate first. So by the time when my Aris Mu is going to release, I purposely placed my Aris Mu in position 5 so that he will be in the target of the least number of attacks and therefore release ultimate slowest. And what this basically means is now that I have potentially created a time gap between when my Liberadoko's ultimate is going to be released and when my Aris Mu's ultimate is going to be released. And then therefore I minimize the amount of overlap between any ultimate, if there is any overlap, that is. So what would happen in battle is my Liberdoko will knock everyone up with his ultimate, and then afterwards my Aris move would then release his blinding effect. And because there's a sufficient time gap in between, I'm not wasting any of my control effect. So this is an example of good positioning. Whereas if I do something like this is going to be a bad positioning because the time interval between my position 2 and position 4 are normally quite short because position 2 is taking extra normal attacks. However, position 4 is also taking a lot of skill attack. So they tend to release ultimate at very similar time to each other. So if I release both of them at the same time, my control effects are going to overlap, and this is going to be a bad example. And this is basically how you can potentially use the time difference to also work your kind of variable control effects to maximize them. The other thing I will just briefly wrapping up here is that, like I said, this is going to affect the speed of your ultimates, etc. Because if you are positioning a certain knight in a certain position, when he's getting hit by more attack, he will release the ultimate faster. So you can also use this as a cheeky way of trying to do some kind of positioning, so you can control which ultimates get released before each other. So the best example I'm gonna give here is gonna be uh, Saga Light, right? So Saga Light is very interesting because Saga Light has an ultimate which does massive AoE damage, but he also have a really impressive skill, which is doing like releasing massive meteorite 14 seconds into the battle to cut everyone's HP by half. So this creates a lot of tactics that you can potentially do with this, which is that his ultimate has a potential to stun. And also do lots of damage. However, if you release his ultimate first, what this allow you to do is potentially stun the enemy so that you can safely allow your Saga Light to survive for the 14 seconds for his massive meteorite to land. So this is one approach you can do with Saga Light. The other approach you can do is actually use Saga Light's meteorite at 40 seconds to cut everyone's HP by half first, and then use his ultimate to attack them because at this point they're already half HP. Your massive AoE ultimate can actually potentially wipe out one or two enemies as a result. So this is basically quite tricky, and both are very viable tactic for you to go down depending on the situation. And this is potentially where you want to position your satellite accordingly and try to control when he actually releases ultimate. In situations where you want to, let's say, release ultimate faster, this is normally going to be in story maps when you actually have trouble making sure Sagalot survive for the full 14 seconds. So you want to stun the enemy as early as possible. Then you want to position him in the top left position, in your position one. So he will take most number of hits and therefore he release ultimate faster. However, if you are actually in PvP against other players, survivability for Sagalot is not normally a problem, and you may want to actually wait for the meteorite to hit first and then release ultimate. And in that case, you probably want to switch your satellite to the top right hand side of position 2 so that he releases ultimate a bit slower, or even take it a bit more extreme to actually play satellite at the back to guarantee he will do his meteorite first before releasing his ultimate.